Welcome to the MHP Exchange, where the riches are in the niches. We'll show you how to invest your way into mobile home parks with real strategies, tips, and behind-the-scenes know-how to grow your cash flow. Stick around. This is where smart investing begins.
Everyone is chasing their first $1 million, but almost no one understands the only number that matters is your first $100,000. And I'll tell you, your first $100,000 is a lot harder than your first $1 million. And it's more important because before you get there is where most people quit. But in building that first 100,000, that's where you build the discipline, the identity, and the belief in yourself that's forged. And this is what separates the dreamers from the builders. And we're going to dissect this all in this episode of the MHP Exchange podcast. Guys, when I first started in real estate, I didn't have any money. I didn't even have a Rolodex. I was relatively new to Staten Island with no network, no mentors, and quite frankly, I didn't have the ability to build in excuses for why this wasn't going to work. This had to work for me. So when I entered real estate, what I did have and what nobody else could beat me on was a grit, a desire, and the ability in my mind to out hustle anyone. I was not going to be defeated because I didn't put the work, energy, or effort in that it took to be successful. So for years, my motto was FILO. And for those of you who know me, right, know what that stands for. First in, last out. And I lived by that creed. There wasn't a door that I wasn't going to knock on. Before I left, I'd always make that one extra call. And that was the ability, that gave me the confidence and the ability that I knew if I stayed with that, that would be on my track to success. But I also knew at that point, I wasn't a real quote unquote investor yet. I wanted to be. I wanted to build my balance sheet and build my net worth and build my real estate portfolio, but I didn't have the capital to do that. But what I could do is I could find opportunities that other people could not. And in doing that, I could create some value for myself because I knew if they were out there building or they were out there running their business, they couldn't find the deals that I could find because this is all I had to do. And I'm going to give you one of my early deals, one of the first deals I did, and I'm wholesaling at this point because I didn't have the capital to buy a deal, but I did have the opportunity to flip deals or wholesale deals. And for those of you that don't know, I would put something in contract and flip it to somebody who could buy it. So at this point, I'm getting ready to wholesale a deal in Staten Island. It is a bungalow, which is essentially a small ranch house on a parcel of property that had high density zoning. And it was right next to a development site that was for sale. So the development site was for 6 units. And I knew on this unit, on this parcel, that the zoning would allow for an additional 4 units, right? So anybody who bought the 6 units would have an additional 4 units and would have a 10-unit building there. And there was some intrinsic value in the land. The property was vacant. I was able to track down the owner, and I put that deal in contract for $160,000. Now, I didn't have $160,000 to buy the property, but I did have $5,000 to put it into contract. So me and a partner at the time, we put it into contract, and I actually sold that development site to a builder. Now that builder, I was going to flip the contract, wholesale that deal to them for $180,000. I was going to make myself a $20,000 spread on just putting this deal in contract. Well, what happened? I get to the closing table, and as I get to the closing table, when they're getting ready to finalize everything, there is a 8-inch encroachment with a fence, a wood fence from the adjoining property, and the builder wouldn't close. As a matter of fact, not only did he not want to close, he renegotiated my fee at the closing table from $20,000 down to $10,000. And not having the ability to close at that, and quite frankly, having $5,000 that I couldn't risk to lose at jeopardy. Not only did I take the reduction, I held my fee in escrow until that fence came down. Now, having already taken a loss of $10,000, I wasn't going to hire anybody to take down that fence. So what did I do? I spent the weekend with a Sawzall and cut that fence down. Unbeknownst to me, that fence had poison ivy all over it, and it ended up being a very painful 10 days while taking a reduction. So sitting there with that pain, it really singed in my mind. And I told myself I would never put myself in a position where I would be in contract to sell a property that I didn't have the ability to close on. I wasn't going to have somebody at the closing table knew that my capital was at jeopardy and put me in the position where I would have to take a discount or risk losing that deal if I didn't have control. And that became part of that identity shift for me. And I'm glad I learned this at a young age, because it turned me from being somebody who was kind of speculating to looking at this as being a real investor. And just know that first $100,000 that you make, that you create, that you earn, that you have there, and that ability that you have in putting into your business, your identity changes. It tells you that you can build, and you move from hope to proof. You know, before that number, before you're at that level, I mean, I don't care what you say, you have very little negotiating power, right? You're a wholesaler and you hope that buyer can close, right? You're dealing with scraps if you're lucky, right? And you have to sell the deal rather than owning equity. But after you have $100,000 in the bank, after you've done that first, you climb that first hurdle, you put yourself in a position where you could bridge some of that earnest money. You can take a piece of the deal, and you can kind of put yourself in a way where you can either walk away from a bad deal or dictate some terms. Because I'll tell you, if I had $100,000 available at that deal, I could have given the seller a little bit more money. I could have paid for a little bit more time. I could have dictated the terms, and I could have ensured the fee that I should have earned. So even though I lost $10,000 at the deal, or I got squeezed at the closing table, that $10,000 was a huge education for me. So part of, everybody looks at $1 million, and we can all have the conversation if $1 million isn't $1 million anymore. But everybody looks at that million as that number in their head that I have to strive towards, that I have to earn. But that first $100,000 is so key, because when you have no money, or very little money, all you could do is wholesale. You can't position yourself inside of the deal because you have no leverage to do that. But when you get to that first $100,000, that gives you a seat at the table. That gives you the ability to say, hey, I can position myself in the capital stack, right? I can sit there. I can negotiate myself a better fee. I can put myself in there for some ownership, and that is where the real wealth starts to build. So I just want to reset your mindset a little bit for those of you who are looking at and going into the year saying, I need to get myself $1 million. I need to earn $1 million. I gotta build $1 million portfolio. That feels real far away, especially if you're like me and you started with nothing. It's so far away. You have to give yourself increments. You have to give yourself hurdles, and you got to reward that performance along the way. Give yourself something to strive for. Look, if I was looking to lose 50 pounds in the next year, I wouldn't look at losing 50 pounds in a quarter. I'd break it down into pieces. What could I do over the next 12 weeks? Can I lose 12 pounds in 12 weeks? Can I lose a pound a week? All of a sudden, it becomes tangible, real, and possible. What's a pound a week? So if I'm looking to get $1 million, make my first million, I don't want to shoot for that. I want to shoot for my first 100,000. And what does that do? That compound, you earn that first million, that first 100,000. That provides the proof. That proof follows the belief. It builds the belief. You realize that for you to earn that money, you had to build discipline, and it builds momentum to help you along the way. So I'm going to sit here and tell you this. Don't worry about your first million. Your first $100,000, that's your initiation. That's the moment you stop playing small. That's where you start operating like someone who really belongs. You have to reinforce your discipline. You have to reward those wins along the way, because that will help you build momentum. That will help you start looking longer term. That is how you can create equity-driven wealth. So if for those of you out there listening, I have one question for you. If you're on your path right now, if you're striving like I am, still looking to build, right? Still looking to grow and challenge yourself to do more, I'm going to ask you this one question. Would you help someone you don't know who's learning about finding, funding, or operating their next real estate deal? And if your answer is yes, then drop a rating and a review on the streaming platform that you're listening to this podcast on. And for doing that, if you send that review over to the MHP Exchange, I am going to send you a free copy of our after site visit report. This is the same report that my team uses to ensure that everybody is moving forward on the business plan and we're building wealth inside the assets we own. Until next time, everyone, this is Frank Rizzo with the MHP Exchange. Happy investing.